I got an email from a listener. I will not use his name, but per his request, we'll call him Anonymous18. He says, I heard your opinion on the WrestleMania main event of Sasha Banks against Bianca Belair. You enjoyed it, even though the build was worth shit. I didn't watch the main event. The build-up was not only bad, but cringe for me. I enjoyed when Becky main evented. What a story. First time women main evented and Ronda was on the show too. I'm just going to ask you this. Can you imagine having friends over for WrestleMania? They're casual fans, some from way back. When it's main event time, the friend asks, is it Brock? Is it Undertaker? Is it John Cena? No, it's Sasha Banks against Bianca Belair. What would the room be like? The only reason WWE went with this main event was the agenda. Also heard you saying Sasha should main event multiple WrestleManias. Come on, man. Listening to you since 2009, let's be real. If there's only one night, she will never get that spot. Banks is an attraction, not a main event draw. My question is, after that room watched Banks against Belair, can those fans be drawn back, or would they be pushed away? Take care, Solomonster. You're one of my inspirations. So much to unpack here in this question. First of all, thank you for listening since '09. One of the longtime diehards. I like hearing that. I personally, you want my opinion on things, since it was my opinion that I enjoyed the match, I don't give a fuck about the casual fan. I'm not a casual fan. I'm a professional wrestling fan. Through the good and the bad, I have stuck with this shit for many years. I know what I like, and I know what I don't like. And I don't give a fuck what the casual observer who will only watch wrestling twice a year thinks about Sasha Banks against Bianca Belair. Now, that's different than, what the company thinks. The company should care about what those fans think. But you asked me for my opinion. So I'm giving you my opinion. I personally don't care. If I'm going to have people, which I wouldn't anyway, if I'm going to have people over to watch the WrestleMania main event, instead I'm off because I got to take notes. I'm not having a party. I got to go live when the event is over. There ain't going to be no gatherings at the castle of Solomonster. But if I did, you bring up the idea, is it John Cena? Is it Brock Lesnar? Is it Undertaker? See, that's part of the problem. You've just highlighted a perfect problem. They cannot continue to be reliant on the John Cenas and the Triple H's and the Undertakers and the Goldbergs of the world. While they may have big names, and those people that were watching in 2002 or 1998, they may know who those names are. And they may appeal to them. That's the old guard. They can be on the show and an attraction. You'll have Goldberg doing matches here and there. You can have those people on the show, no problem. You don't want to have those people in your main events. Now, if John Cena were to come back one day and they wanted to do the big story, can he get title number 17? That's different because there's a story there that you can tell. But just to put big names in the main event for the sake of putting big names in the main events because you don't have faith in your current roster, you're never ever going to build for the future. Whether it's men, whether it's women, we're going to be sitting here in 20 years having the same fucking conversation. Oh, I used to watch wrestling in 2000, 38 years ago. Where's The Undertaker? Well, he's fucking dead, okay? Don't worry about The Undertaker. Oh, I hope he's not dead, but I'm just saying. Don't worry about he's the dead man, so I'm not wrong. Don't worry about The Undertaker. Don't worry about John Cena. Don't worry about Triple H. You got to get new blood in there. And I don't care whether it's male or female. It could be both. At some point, you've got to move on from that mindset. You've got to move on from that attitude. And you cannot just worry about what those fans think. Because guess what? Those fans, they're not paying for Peacock. They're not buying tickets to the show. You said it yourself. Oh, wrestling's on. I think I'll just come over and I'll watch. Do you think that if Brock Lesnar is in the main event of WrestleMania that year, that casual fan that you just talked about is suddenly going to start watching WWE every week? That person will not give a shit. They'll watch WrestleMania that night, and they won't watch again for another year. Now, I'm not saying the company shouldn't be doing things to appeal to those people, but they don't have to be in main events. How is anybody going to look at a Sasha Banks or a Roman Reigns or someone like that or a Big E? How are they ever supposed to look at them as main eventers if you don't put them in your fucking main event? If you don't build them up enough to be in those main events, nobody will look at them as a main eventer. Now, I enjoy watching Sasha Banks. I'm not going to apologize for it. I made the comment. I didn't say that I want her in every WrestleMania main event. What I said, don't twist what I said. What I said was, this will not be her final WrestleMania main event. She will have more in the future. And she will. And probably Charlotte will as well. Becky, I don't know. I don't know what her status is. Ronda's pregnant. Ronda's having a kid. She may never come back. But that's what I said. This should be the first of many in the future WrestleMania main event matches for Sasha Banks. And maybe even for Bianca, because I like Bianca as well. You make one valid point that I agree with. If WrestleMania goes back to being one night next year, Sasha Banks ain't going to be in the WrestleMania main event. You're right. It's going to be Roman Reigns or whoever the top champion is, whether it's WWE title or Universal title. If it's Roman as the champion, then it's going to be Roman Reigns, because Roman Reigns is the biggest star in the company. So it should be him defending his title in the main event of WrestleMania. Now, they can take a big women's match and they can brand it as a co-main. You could do that. And I'm not opposed to, if there's a strong enough women's match and women's story going into WrestleMania, I wouldn't object if they wanted to make that match the main event. But you're right, they're not going to. But, when you say, would these fans be drawn back if they saw Sasha and Bianca in the main event? Well, then you know what? School them, educate them. Bring them up to speed on show them some Sasha Banks matches. Show them the match with Bayley in Brooklyn. Anybody who likes pro wrestling, I don't see how you cannot watch that match and not think, hey, that was pretty good. She's put together a fairly impressive resume of matches. She is one of the biggest names in the company. I didn't say the biggest, I said one of the biggest. And when you have 2 nights of WrestleMania, there is nothing wrong if you have a match strong enough in making that one of your main events. You're right, the build-up was shit. But guess what? You didn't watch the match because you didn't like the build. I acknowledged in the lead-up to WrestleMania, the build sucked. But I was still hopeful and looking forward to the match itself, because that was a match that I had earmarked as being the SmackDown Women's title match back in October or November. Probably November. So I was looking forward to the match. I never intended to not watch the match. I said the match was great in spite of the booking. And I would tell you to go back and watch the match because it was great. Now, if you don't want to do that, then hey, that's up to you. But, clearly you're not a fan of these women and their work, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would say before you comment on the whole match and why it didn't belong in the main event, watch the match. I thought those women lived up to expectations. I thought it was a fine main event. And I thought that the men knocked it out of the park the next night on night 2. 2 fine main events of WrestleMania this year. I have nothing bad to say about the main events of WrestleMania this year. And the fact that the women got the first one did not bring it down, in my view, at all, because the match I thought was great. That kind of stuff doesn't bother me. If you have old school fans who can't accept, the women in the main event, what a joke. Yeah, well, what do you expect? If you're talking about fans from 20 years ago, look at how the women were booked back then. They didn't start to take women's wrestling seriously in this company until 2015, 2016. That's only about 5 or 6 years. I wouldn't expect fans from 15, 20 years ago to care. Why should they? All they remember were fucking bikini contests and women's wrestling was not a priority back then. Women's wrestling, in many cases, wasn't even that great in that company back then. What was it, the fact that the women were terrible wrestlers? Was it the fact that they were only giving them 90 seconds per match? I'm sure that had something to do with it. Their frame of reference, I don't blame them for feeling that way about the women, because look at the era of women's wrestling that they came from in WWE. This is all foreign to them now. But you're at a point now where when it comes to the casual at best or the lapsed fans who only want to see big names, those big names aren't going to be around forever. And a lot of them are gone. Undertaker is done, or so he says. Triple H, he'll have some matches, but even Triple H, he wasn't even on the card this year. He's nearing the end of his rope too. These guys aren't going to be around forever. You have to start building for the future. And paying less attention to the people who are only interested in the big names in main events. can have big names on the show. They don't have to be in your main event. You've got to build for the future. And that includes the men and the women. It can't just be one or the other. So it will not be the last time you see the women in the main event, especially if they continue to do 2-night WrestleManias. You'll probably see a lot less of it if there's only one night. But look, it happened once, right? WrestleMania 35 was only one night. We had women in the main event, and never say never. But when you say that the only reason they were in the main event was the agenda, I mean, I know what you're saying. And believe me, WWE, they were more than happy to go ahead and announce that, we've got women in our main event, and it's the first time in WrestleMania history that we had 2 black women in the main event, and that was a huge deal. I don't want to say that's the only reason they did it, but I can't speak to their motives. Knowing how this company operates, yeah, that probably had a lot to do with why they put them in the main event. Doesn't make them any less deserving, though, of being in that spot. To say otherwise, I think, is a slap in their face, and that's disrespectful to them, and that's bullshit. So I wouldn't go that far. But my opinion, I don't give a fuck about the casual fan. They're not the ones sitting in the trenches like you and me. Or at least me. You didn't even watch the match. I sit through this shit every week to get to the good stuff. You wade through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. I don't care about the guy who will only watch wrestling once a year because he wants to see Bill Goldberg. They're of no concern to me. But that would be my answer to you.